Inside the COVID Origins Racoon dog cage match. The small community of researchers studying COVID-19's origins erupted into open conflict recently over access to data from the pandemic's early days. With former China CDC Director George F. Gao telling VF a lab leak can't be ruled out, and leading Western scientists sticking to their market origin guns, is there any hope for a global collaboration to solve the mystery? On March 10, Peter Bogner was on an overnight flight from Washington, D.C. to Singapore when his phone lit up with a message from WeChat, the Chinese instant messaging app. "Hi Peter," it said. "Urgent thing. Our data are released without our permission." Bogner is the founder of Jazade, a platform used by scientists around the world to share data. The man pinging him was a researcher at China's Center for Disease Control and Prevention named William Liu. In the early days of the pandemic, China's CDC had sent a team to collect viral samples at the Wuhan seafood market where COVID-19 had first emerged. "I am in a plane," Bogner typed back. "Where is this data released? By what link?" As tense messages flew back and forth, Liu explained that his team had been blindsided when 50 of its datasets analyzing the Wuhan market samples had suddenly become visible to the platform's users. "Do you think you need to send some message to them to explain that the release is due to some misoperation?" Liu wrote to a Jazade staffer on March 10. "And the information of these data are not final and need to updating and correcting. They may get some inaccurate conclusion based on these data." The China CDC team had drawn on the data for a research paper that was undergoing a painstaking peer review at the journal Nature. The paper would conclude that the data offered no evidence that the virus had spilled over from an animal to humans at the Wuhan market. Instead, it said the market may have been the site of a superspreader event, meaning that the virus had originated elsewhere. Maria D. Bogner assured Liu that GISAID's policies protected users' intellectual property rights. Any scientists wishing to use their data would first be required to reach out for cooperation and consent. In the end, however, the wobbly honor system pinning together one of the world's largest troves of data on the COVID-19 virus buckled under the debate over the pandemic's origins. The China CDC team, led by the prominent virologist George F. Gao, asked Jazade to make the Wuhan market data private again. By then, though, it had already been downloaded by several Western scientists from another team studying the origin question. The team was co-led by Michael Werobay, an evolutionary virologist at the University of Arizona. "Do you think you need to send some message to them to explain that the release is due to some misoperation?" Liu wrote to a Jazade staffer on March 10. "And the information of these data are not final and need to updating and correcting. They may get some inaccurate conclusion based on these data." The China CDC team had drawn on the data for a research paper that was undergoing a painstaking peer review at the journal Nature. The paper would conclude that the data offered no evidence that the virus had spilled over from an animal to humans at the Wuhan market. Instead, it said the market may have been the site of a superspreader event, meaning that the virus had originated elsewhere. Maria D. van Kerkhove speaks during a press conference NBSPI Geneva January 22, 2020. NBSB Maria D. van Kerkhove speaks during a press conference in Geneva, January 22, 2020. Pierre Albuy Getty Images. Advertisement. The paper was still being peer-reviewed when, 6 days after Liu's frantic WeChat message to Bogner, the Werobay team's own analysis of the Wuhan market data came to light. It reached a very different conclusion. The Atlantic magazine reported on the findings under the headline, "The Strongest Evidence Yet That an Animal Started the Pandemic," and news outlets around the world swiftly followed suit. Renew Vanity Fair Plus. Give a free gift subscription. Renew today. One of the biggest arguments against the market origin hypothesis has been the absence of a clear, intermediate, host animal. Coronaviruses generally originate in bats, but Wuhan, where COVID-19 first appeared in humans, wasn't home to colonies of wild bats, and the Wuhan seafood market did not sell them. It made sense that some intermediate species might have contracted the virus from bats, and then infected an unlucky human at the market, where live animals were sold and slaughtered. That has been the precedent for a number of pandemics, including the first SARS outbreak in 2002. But so far, there had been little evidence of what that animal might be. Now, Werobei and his team believed they had found a strong possible answer in the Wuhan market data. Some of the viral samples, the team discovered, contained genetic material from raccoon dogs. These fox-like animals are susceptible to SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. It was absolutely a surprise to find animal DNA in the samples, says Alex Kritz-Christoph, a microbiologist formerly with the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, who helped lead the analysis. I thought there is a slim chance we'd get the signal of the animals amid the bacteria of the market environment. It was really striking. With the DNA of raccoon dogs and several other susceptible animals present in an area of the market where wildlife was being sold, the mystery of the intermediate host, Werobei's team argued, was closer to being solved, and with it, the mystery of the pandemic's origin. The Werobei team posted a report online, describing those findings and their rationale for sharing them. We respect our China CDC colleagues' right to be first to publish a manuscript on their own data, and do not plan to submit a paper that would compete with their manuscript currently undergoing review, the report said. It also noted that the team was well aware of GISAID's rules, had not breached them, and had no intention of breaching them. Advertisement. This expression of professional courtesy hinted at how things might have been resolved in an alternate universe, where the search for the pandemic's origin was conducted in a spirit of dispassionate scientific curiosity. But here in this universe, the debate has become a geopolitical battleground littered with casualties. Within a day of the report's appearance, GISAID temporarily suspended each member of the Werobei team for allegedly violating the platform's terms of use. If I see someone go to the dry hills of California with a gas canister, Bogner says of the decision, we are not going to sit back and wait. But the suspensions cast a wide net. As Edward Holmes, an Australian evolutionary biologist working with Werobei, wrote to GISAID on March 23, to be very clear, 1. I never downloaded these data from GISAID. 2. I do not have these data. 3. I have never analyzed these data. BY. Next, it was Bogner's turn to take fire. He soon found himself fending off media allegations that he governed the platform erratically and had not disclosed elements of his past, including a conviction for securities fraud. To the Chinese researchers, it looked as if their data had been summarily released without notice. But GISAID records show that 2 members of the Chinese team received routine messages on January 30, notifying them that the data had become visible. At the World Health Organization, the incident amplified concerns that China was withholding critical information that should have been shared in 2020. As one WHO official wrote in an editorial, the Chinese team's lack of data disclosure is simply inexcusable. As for the Werobei team's raccoon dog findings, they lost traction once the computational biologist Jesse Bloom came forward with his own analysis of the Wuhan market data. Bloom's more agnostic take prompted David Wallace Wells of the New York Times to write in an op-ed, what was briefly hailed as something like a pandemic Rosetta Stone turned out to be, on further analysis, something more like a rock with some random scratches on it. George Gao says he spoke to Werobei and Holmes before they posted their report and told them, my analysis with my colleagues has no evidence it's raccoon dogs. Eddie and Michael, they didn't believe me. Werebe says the Wuhan market data, though an incremental advance on its own, confirms the presence of illegal wildlife at the market, identifies a short list of intermediate hosts that can potentially be tracked back to their source, and adds to decisive evidence of this pandemic starting at the market from the wildlife trade. Advertisement. William Liu did not respond to requests for comment. In a statement to Vanity Fair, Bogner says that recent press attacks have been closer to a hit piece than to valid constructive criticism. He says the facts and the evidence refute any allegations of transgression. Vanity Fair interviewed 50 people for this account and obtained dozens of previously unreported emails, text messages, and other records. The fight over the Wuhan market data is just one chapter in a broader reckoning over how the world's scientists can share vitally important data while protecting their conclusions from geopolitical enmity. It is a problem that urgently needs a solution. The question of how SARS-CoV-2 first entered the human population remains unresolved, and the effort to resolve it has become politicized beyond my wildest dreams, the WHO's COVID-19 technical lead Maria D. Van Kerkhove says. It is clouding the ability of scientists to work together. Intensive public health diplomacy and global scientific partnership are required to cope with the ongoing pandemic, let alone the next one. But the recent skirmish over the Wuhan market data offers a cautionary tale of how fragile the infrastructure for such collaboration is. Egos, nationalism, and the competition to publish first in prestigious journals have all played a role in fracturing cooperation. George Gao, who was the head of China's CDC from 2017 to 2022, embodies many of the contradictions at the heart of this global genomic battle royal. On one hand, he remains constrained by an authoritarian government that has been notoriously unwilling to cooperate with investigations that could hold the Chinese government accountable for the pandemic. On the other hand, he is a globally respected scientist with access to some of the best available data on the early stages of the pandemic. Some suspect he may know more about the origins of SARS-CoV-2 than he is permitted to disclose. Over an extended breakfast at a hotel in Geneva, Switzerland, where he was attending an international conference, Gao recently spoke with Vanity Fair about the Jazade dust-up and the ongoing hunt for the origin of the virus. He was at turns convivial and frustrated, and his remarks are some of his most extended to a Western media outlet since the pandemic's onset. The origin of SARS-CoV-2 remains unknown, he says, and no possibility, including that of a lab leak, can be ruled out. I am a scientist. I never want to say anything before the conclusion. I never want to say anything like possible, maybe, probable, or definite. That can only be used for the politics, not for the scientists. He adds, before any conclusion, everything is possible. Everything is a maybe. We have to wait to follow through. Asked if he's open to the possibility that the virus came from a Chinese laboratory, he responds, I think everything's possible. But he has the same question for all possible scenarios: where's the evidence? Advertisement. Gao says the fraught politics surrounding the origins debate are likely to thwart any answers, at least in the short term. Many Western scientists warn that answers will become only more elusive as time goes by and biological evidence degrades further. But Gao says, the origin needs the time to reveal because we don't have an answer. He adds that he is 50-50 on whether we will ever have one. Once the scientists can do free science, we might get the answer. But now, everything is politicized. According to Lawrence Gostin, director of the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law at Georgetown, the ideal vision for global science would be a full and open sharing of information including pathogen samples and genomic sequencing data. And it wouldn't be a bargaining chip or a question of national sovereignty. The second thing is a platform that is widely trusted and legitimate, that grants any legitimate researcher open access to all relevant data. In this case, all the relevant data was uploaded to Jazade, says GAO, everything's in Peter's computer. Peter Bogner is not the person you'd expect to find at the center of a high-stakes scientific feud. A Munich-born veteran of the entertainment industry with an ebullient manner, he has come to be on a first-name basis with a far-flung network of scientists, many in the developing world, for a simple reason: they trust his platform with their data. 10 months into the pandemic, at the International Conference on Genomics in Wuhan, Bogner received the 2020 Research Leader Award for his work promoting scientific collaboration. In a well-choreographed Zoom presentation, the prominent Chinese genetics researcher Huan Mingyang presented the award to Bogner, praising him as so honest, so humble. Bogner had no public health background to speak of when, in 2006, he showed up at an influenza conference in Cambridge, England, and learned of a dangerous scientific impasse. As the deadly H5N1 bird flu spread, Indonesia had gone on a scientific strike of sorts. A key step in combating an evolving virus is to collect and analyze all the genomic sequences as they arise, but Indonesia's health minister, Siti Fadila Supari, refused to share its sequences on existing international platforms due to concerns about Western exploitation. For years, scientists in the developing world had watched as powerful pharma companies and better-funded Western scientists laid claim to their data. They were left uncredited in prestigious publications, and the countries where the viruses first emerged were unable to afford the medicine their work had helped to produce. In 2006, an Italian veterinarian blew the whistle on the WHO for operating a closed database of genomic sequences, to which a handful of top laboratories were given exclusive access. Bogner's sudden emergence in the flu world, as a genomic sequencing hobbyist, has not been fully explained. Of all the things I have known him to be involved in, this is the most peculiar, says a former TV executive who networked with Bogner years earlier. He's not a scientist. He's not an MD. He's not a public health official. He's just a guy that gets things done. Bogner says he first learned about the spread of H5N1 at the World Economic Forum in Davos. A series of subsequent chance meetings inspired him to try and help end the international standoff over data sharing. I wanted to do something good, he says. Advertisement. In 2008, Bogner launched a platform called Jazade, which originally stood for the Global Initiative on Sharing Avian Influenza Data. It offered protection to scientists who uploaded data by requiring anyone interested in publishing it to credit the original submitters. Basing a publication on someone else's data without permission is known as scooping, and can lead to temporary suspension from the platform. Jazade allowed all the countries that decided to stop sharing sequences to continue resharing, because they felt safe on the platform, says Dr. Marie-Paule Keeney, Director of Research at the French Scientific Institute in CERN. In the Hollywood era Bogner had come up in, she points out, copyright, sharing, and distribution are all regulated by rules. While Jazade succeeded modestly as a collaborative site for flu researchers, the pandemic catapulted it into prominence. It became a central research platform, with close to 16 million SARS-CoV-2 sequences posted from 215 countries. I have never seen anything like this global cooperative system, says Bet Korber, a computational biologist at Los Alamos National Laboratory, who now serves on GISAID's Scientific Advisory Council. It's a remarkable achievement, and it's been remarkably useful. After the temporary suspension of Werobey and his co-authors, however, Jazade was accused in the press of various shortcomings, including arbitrary decision-making and a lack of transparency. Science magazine also unearthed Bogner's felony conviction for securities fraud in his 20s. According to a record obtained by VF, the conviction was downgraded to a misdemeanor and then dismissed. One former funder, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations (CEPI), found Jazade reluctant to supply detailed financial information. CEPI CEO Richard Hatchett says he still wants to know why they have been so resistant to adopting transparent procedures. Bogner says Jazade supplied all the information CEPI requested. The International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations has urged Jazade to clarify its governance as a condition of future funding. But the organization's Director General, Thomas Quaney, says the platform is invaluable and the attacks on it appear orchestrated. As he puts it, to reinvent Jazade, that would be a hell of a job. He adds, "One question for me was, who benefits in pulling Jazade down?" Bogner says that once Jazade became the platform of choice for this pandemic, database envy really erupted. Nevertheless, in a move intended to retain the trust of its data contributors, he says Jazade will soon launch an independent compliance board responsible for addressing a wide range of governance matters. The feud over the China CDC samples has been brewing for more than a year. On February 24, 2022, GAO and a team of 37 other Chinese scientists posted their first preprint, an early version of a peer-reviewed paper, analyzing the 1,380 samples collected in the market. Researchers had swabbed everything from surfaces, drains, and equipment to stray animals, frozen carcasses, and feces. They found that of 457 samples taken from 18 animal species, none tested positive for the virus. The paper theorized that the market might have acted as an amplifier of the outbreak, but was not the site of its origin, and offered no evidence of an animal host. The Chinese team had been surprised by its own finding. "We initially thought there must be something to do with the intermediate animal host, because it's logic," GAO explains over breakfast. Everybody thought this. The following day, however, a team of 18 Western scientists led by Michael Werobey released a preprint of their own, this one arguing that the market was indeed ground zero of the pandemic. This paper used a different set of data, a geospatial analysis of the earliest known cases of COVID-19 that showed them centered on the Wuhan market. The preprint asserted dispositive evidence that the virus had originated there. Though there was still no evidence of an infected animal, a companion analysis concluded that there were likely at least 2 spillover events at the market from 2 separate infected animals. A peer-reviewed version of the Werobey team's paper in Science last July made the same case, but with several caveats. Noting insufficient evidence to define upstream events and circumstances that remained obscure, the paper nonetheless concluded, "Our analyses indicate that the emergence of SARS-CoV-2 occurred through the live wildlife trade in China and show that the Huanan market was the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic." An acrimonious debate over the origins question raged on. On February 26 of this year, the Wall Street Journal reported that the Department of Energy had shifted its conclusion and now assessed with low confidence that COVID-19 most likely arose from a research-related accident at a Wuhan laboratory. The Energy Department, with its network of top national laboratories, including Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore, has long been viewed as the scientific brain of the intelligence agencies. Its new assessment was reportedly prompted in part by new evidence, which has yet to be made public. The FBI has assessed with moderate confidence that the virus likely originated with a laboratory-related accident. The National Intelligence Council and 4 other agencies have made low-confidence assessments favoring a natural origin, and 3 others remain undecided. In mid-June, the intelligence agencies face a legal deadline to declassify material on COVID-19's origins. A security guard stands outside the Huanan seafood wholesale market where the coronavirus was detected in Wuhan. A security guard stands outside the Huanan seafood wholesale market where the coronavirus was detected in Wuhan. Hector Retimel, The Getty Images. Advertisement. For Michael Werobey, the origins mystery is a scientific question best answered by scientists. Though intelligence communities might be able to play a role, they should not be looked to provide assessment on scientific questions. But Gerald Parker, director of the Pandemic and Biosecurity Policy Program at the Scowcroft Institute for International Affairs, says the Energy Department's scientists are some of the best in the US, with decades of experience in biodetection. They also understand the forensic standards of proof that few in the biological sciences do. He adds, even their low confidence assessment is pretty strong. The Energy Department news prompted days of international headlines. And then, on March 4, a scientist at the French National Centre for Scientific Research named Florence Debar was scrolling through the GISAID platform when she spotted data that had been previously uploaded by GAO's team. She alerted Werebe and his colleagues, and from there things really spiraled. In the best of times, a career in public health can be a dreadful life, says George Gao. But during a history-making pandemic, it is a crucible like no other. This is why you have to train yourself, he says. If you couldn't cope with those pressures, don't choose this as a normal job. In China, GAO endured the type of internet rage that has rained down on top US health officials including Dr. Anthony Fauci. GAO was accused of downplaying the pandemic early on, and of denying that the virus was being transmitted from person to person at a time when he was working on a research paper showing exactly that. He has said his remarks were taken out of context. Early in his career, he had trained as a veterinarian, and online detractors took to calling him Vet GAO as a way of casting doubt on his medical expertise. In 2021, he acknowledged that China's COVID-19 vaccines offered insufficient protection, and said that it might be necessary to increase the dosage or frequency of the shots. His unauthorized remarks, which he later called a complete misunderstanding, appear to have since been scrubbed from the Chinese internet. In July 2022, at 60 years old, he stepped down from leading China's CDC, whether by choice is unclear. A press release attributed the move to his age. One thing is undeniable, even as he travels the international conference circuit, albeit with a government chaperone in tow, he is a scientist on a political tightrope. He was born in the northern Chinese province of Shaanxi to a poor family with 6 children. His mother was illiterate and could not even sign her name, yet he and 2 of his siblings went on to get PhDs. Gao describes his mother admiringly. She told me, be polite, be honest, be a good man. Gao earned an advanced degree at Oxford and conducted postdoctoral research at Harvard. Later, he rose through the ranks of China's scientific leadership on the strength of a sterling publication record and deft bureaucratic skills. In 2014, he was portrayed as a hero by the Chinese media for his on-the-ground response to the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone, where he deployed a mobile Chinese-made testing laboratory. At Oxford, one of his professors referred to him jokingly as the future president of China, due to his poise and engaging manner. Sir John Bell, the Regius Professor of Medicine there, who supervised GAO's postdoctoral research, says of his performance as China's CDC director, it's a politically charged environment, and he managed to hang on to a real sense of honesty and truth as he made his way through it. He adds, I would be very surprised if George is covering anything up. Advertisement. GAO acknowledges that his previous role as an administrator at China's CDC entailed saying things to calm down the public, to make sure the politicians are happy. But as a scientist, he says, whatever we publish, if my name is on it, it's science. It's correct. GAO has said he is open to various origin hypotheses, including one largely dismissed by Western scientists, but embraced by the Chinese government, that the virus may have arrived from outside China in packaged frozen food. Some scientists, assessing this theory as propaganda, have questioned whether GAO is not actually at liberty to follow the science or, worse, is aiding the Chinese government in a cover-up. Not that there's any consensus over what China might be trying to conceal. Werobei says the evidence supporting a market origin has posed a very serious challenge to the anywhere but here position maintained by Chinese officials. He adds, they are very, very defensive about that, and kind of in a panic about it. But Professor Perry Link, Emeritus Professor of East Asian Studies at Princeton University, tells Vanity Fair, there is no doubt that the Chinese Communist Party is more afraid of the lab theory than the wet market theory. They are afraid of being held responsible for the escape of the virus. Link adds, whatever the theory, the CCP has deliberately withheld data on COVID origins from scientists, both domestic and international. The WHO's Maria van Kerkhove says of the Chinese government and its failure to share crucial information, to this day, I could not tell you which studies have been completed and which studies have not, and that is inexcusable. China's International Press Center and embassy in the US did not respond to requests for comment. On March 11, Michael Werobei moved to comply with GSAID requirements and sent cordial emails to both GAO and another member of the China CDC team. The samples obviously contain cool information, he wrote to GAO, and we would be eager to work across the various borders that separate our group from your team on this project if that would be possible or desirable. Would be interesting to swap notes. Werobei and his colleagues had begun analyzing the market data and found that several samples, which had tested positive for SARS-CoV-2, also contained the DNA of raccoon dogs. To the researchers, the DNA data looked like a missing piece of the natural origin puzzle. Here, at last, was evidence of a possible animal host. But against such a highly charged backdrop, swapping notes was hardly what GAO and his team had in mind. Can you imagine if I give my raw data to that American guy? GAO says of Werobei, who is actually Canadian. That's original research. In GAO's telling, it would have been unthinkable to cede control of such consequential data to international scientists before his team's analysis was complete. But to Werobei, the withholding of such important data, until 3 years later, is extremely problematic. According to Ben Brander, GISAID's vice president and in-house counsel, one reason why this data is so special and sensitive to these Chinese researchers, they risked their lives to collect it. In early 2020, you couldn't pay me $1 billion to go to the market in Wuhan, and that's exactly what they did. GAO then received separate phone calls from Werobei and the Australian evolutionary biologist Edward Holmes. They were so stubborn, GAO says, and pushed so hard to advance their hypothesis. According to GAO, they accused him of hiding something and demanded to see more data. I didn't have any more data, he exclaims, insisting that his team had uploaded the full set of samples to GSAID. That's all I have in my hand. Advertisement. As GAO recalls it, I said, okay, man, you are scientists. Let's do decent science. As a scientist, wait, do a decent analysis, and publish a paper after peer review. Werobei says that GAO's characterization doesn't match our phone call at all, which he describes as very friendly, very collegial. Werobei adds that he was seeking collaboration, and didn't mention any particular hypothesis, or seek any additional data. But George seemed very clear that if the collaboration didn't take the form of me agreeing with his interpretation of the data, that humans infected animals, then he wasn't interested in collaborating. Holmes did not respond to several emails seeking comment. Florence DeBar says the Werobei team put careful consideration into its approach to the situation. At every step in the process, when there were different options, we had a discussion about what was the most ethical thing to do. On Sunday, March 12, Van Kerkhove was preparing for a flight to Oman, when one of Werobei's colleagues alerted her to the data they'd found on Jazade. 2 days later, both teams joined a video call with members of the Scientific Advisory Group for the Origins of Novel Pathogens (SAGO), which had been convened by the WHO to investigate the origins of diseases including COVID-19. "We wanted the discussion to be at SAGO, and not on Twitter," says Van Kerkhove. The meeting was one of several efforts to establish a collaborative relationship with our colleagues at China's CDC to share data and findings as rapidly as possible, the Werobei team later wrote in their online report. 2 days later, under its splashy headline touting the strongest evidence yet for a market origin, The Atlantic broke the news of the Werobei team's analysis. The story described how some of the positive viral samples from the market were also coming back chock full of animal genetic material, much of which was a match for the common raccoon dog. As raccoon dog headlines unfurled across the world, even a member of Werobei's team appeared dismayed. The Atlantic headline was ridiculous. "It was embarrassing," says DeBar. "And our result is not the strongest. It's strong because it's one piece in a large body of evidence all going in the same direction." A spokesperson for The Atlantic, Anna Bross, says the magazine's report was careful to state what was known and what wasn't. "This is the strongest genetic evidence yet that appears to link the coronavirus's origins to raccoon dogs, which could have been carrying and shedding the virus at the end of 2019. Advertisement. Then, on May 3, a computational biologist at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center named Jesse D. Bloom posted a preprint that cooled the raccoon dog fervor. He found that, among the 14 samples with large amounts of raccoon dog genetic material, the only one that contained any SARS-CoV-2 had just a tiny amount of virus material, one sequence fragment out of 200 million. The data are not sufficient to provide any evidence either way that any of the animals were infected," Bloom says. A Hong Kong-based conservation biologist, Alice Hughes, who was not involved in the research, concurs, "I think we are looking for an answer that is a needle in a haystack, with data that is inconclusive." She adds, "Any strong claims are likely to be overstated, because the type of data we need either doesn't exist or isn't available." Kritz Christoph believes the data, while not definitive, tells us something important. Could this data set prove the answer to the origin of SARS-CoV-2? The answer was always no. But can it prove that a certain animal was brought to the market? The answer to that is yes, he says. Does it make zoonosis more likely? I think so. But Sergey Pond, an evolutionary biologist at Temple University, describes the Werobei team's raccoon dog analysis as a huge flop. It didn't show anything other than that there were raccoon dogs there and there was virus there. In April, the China CDC team's paper was finally published in Nature, after more than a year of peer review. For a scientific paper, you need the reviewers to agree, GAO says of the long delay. They pushed us very hard. But even before the paper came out, GAO and China's government took a fresh round of heat over their data-sharing practices, sparked by Jazade temporarily putting the market data back behind a wall. WHO officials took aim at the 3-year gap between the collection of the market data and its publication. On April 6, Van Kerkhove published an editorial in Science under the headline, "Share all SARS-CoV-2 data immediately." In it, she wrote, "The lack of data disclosure is simply inexcusable. The longer it takes to understand the origins of the pandemic, the harder it becomes to answer the question, and the more unsafe the world becomes." 2 days later, Chinese officials fired back at a press conference. The current CDC director Hongbing Shen denied that China had failed to be forthcoming and said that nothing had been withheld. He also called out the intolerable behavior of individual officials at the WHO who saw fit to express their opinions at will. Once GAO and his team published their paper, it was duly pummeled online. The Hong Kong scientist Alice Hughes attacked it as riddled with errors and obfuscations, including a finding that was almost certainly due to contamination, or some other mistake: the finding of panda DNA among the samples. In this whole contested saga, there may only be one clear point of agreement. No one, at any time, brought a great panda, the most treasured and protected species in China, into the grungy, crowded Wuhan market, where wild animals are believed to have been illegally slaughtered. How could you have a great panda in that market? GAO says, laughing at the improbable thought. It's a death sentence, that you lose your life. GAO did not directly explain the erroneous result, but said of the jumbled market environment, you have birds flying, rats. You have everything, not just seafood. Asked if it's important to learn where SARS-CoV-2 came from, GAO answers emphatically, of course. We want to prevent the next potential pandemic. As to the way forward, he says, let's work together. On May 5, the WHO declared an end to COVID-19 as a public health emergency of international concern. That same day, it also tried to referee an end to the Racoon dog cage match. It quietly brought together members of GAO's team, Werobei's team, and Jesse Bloom for a discussion with SAGO members. The contents of the meeting, whose existence has not been previously reported, remain confidential, says Van Kerkhove. What she can say is simply that the foundation of science is collaboration. Additional reporting by Catherine Lee.